Franklin carefully pressed his thumb into the soil, his granddaughter Ellie watching with curiosity. "This is how we plant hope," he said. The warm sun cast golden streaks across the yard, highlighting the fine creases around Franklin's eyes. Ellie crouched beside him, elbows stained green, her tiny fingers tracing the edge of a lavender sprig. Her face scrunched with questions, the kind a child doesn't always say out loud. "What if someone doesn't want us to grow it?" she finally whispered, barely above the rustle of wind through pine. Franklin looked up, studying the sloping rooftops of Lakewood Pines. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, the hum of the nearby lake blending with the distant call of a mourning dove. He smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from Ellie's cheek. "Then we grow it twice as bright." Earlier that afternoon, he had picked her up from school. Ellie's backpack bounced with each step as they walked to his old Chevy, the rear seat still littered with gardening magazines and grocery coupons. She had chattered about a school project on soil pH and how worms made everything better, the unsung heroes, she had called them. Now, as they worked side by side, the small plot of earth in Franklin's front yard began to change. What had once been a patch of weeds and crabgrass slowly gave way to ordered rows, delineated by twine and stick. The air carried a mix of fresh soil, cut grass, and distant barbecue smoke from across the lake. Franklin pulled out an old hand trowel, its wooden handle cracked but sturdy. He turned it over in his palm. "This was your Grandma Ruthie's," he said. "She planted tulips every March, even when there was still frost." Ellie leaned in, wide-eyed. "Did they grow?" "Not always. But she said it was the trying that mattered." They worked until Ellie's fingers ached and the sun slipped behind the trees. As twilight arrived, she propped up her final plant marker, Hope Patch, established 2023 written in green glitter pen. Franklin gave her a high five, smearing dirt across her knuckles. The mailbox clanged unexpectedly. Franklin rose, brushing off his jeans. A white envelope peeked from the metal slot. It was crisp, official-looking. He frowned. They never deliver mail this late. Inside was a typed letter from the Lakewood Pines HOA. Its tone was cordial but firm, citing non-compliance with community appearance standards and requesting the immediate removal or redesign of unauthorized front yard modifications. Franklin reread the sentence 3 times. "Is it bad?" Ellie asked. "It's nothing serious," he said, folding the paper neatly and slipping it into his back pocket. "We'll fix it if it's wrong, right?" "Right, if it is wrong," she echoed. Later, they stopped by Marge's diner, as they did every Thursday. Franklin ordered his usual, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and tipped 20% out of habit. The booth smelled of formica and fried onions. Marge herself shuffled by with 2 root beer floats and a smile. "You spoil her, Frank." "Someone's got to," he said, chuckling. Jim, the neighbor from across the street, slid into the booth across from Franklin while Ellie stirred her float. "Got one of those letters yet?" Jim asked. Franklin raised a brow. "You too?" "Last month. My wind chimes were excessive noise pollution." They exchanged a tired look, the kind only neighbors under the thumb of Delia Munn could share. Her name hadn't been mentioned, but her shadow hovered over the conversation. "She's still president?" Franklin asked. "Running it like a country club," Jim muttered. When they got home, Ellie pulled out her sketchpad. The pages were dotted with half-drawn carrots, lavender borders, and a little gazebo that didn't yet exist. She colored until her fingers cramped, humming softly. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into its nighttime quiet. Porch lights blinked on one by one, and the streetlights cast long, sleepy shadows across driveways. That night, as Ellie sketched the garden plan, a black SUV idles by their mailbox and then drives off slowly. The morning sun had just lit the marigolds when Franklin saw it. His garden was gone, flattened, soil disturbed, markers broken. He stood on the porch, one hand wrapped tightly around his coffee mug, the other slowly curling into a fist. The soil that had been so lovingly turned days ago now lay in rough mounds, scattered with shattered stakes and torn seedlings. The Hope Patch sign Ellie had decorated was cracked in two, half buried in a footprint. Inside, Ellie's footsteps padded to the doorway. She didn't speak. Just stood beside her grandfather, hugging the remainder of the wooden sign to her chest. Her expression was not one of shock but quiet betrayal, the kind that only children feel when they realize the world doesn't always play fair. Franklin had told her just the night before, no one would dare mess with a child's garden. Now he swallowed those words with the bitter taste of morning coffee, black and scalding. The newspaper lay unread on the table, creased neatly along its fold. He fetched his old camera from the hallway closet, the strap still smelling faintly of the leather oil Ruthie used to polish it. Methodically, he snapped photos from every angle, the trampled rose, the torn-up herbs, the crushed lavender Ellie had planted with such care. The silence between them felt heavier than if Ellie had screamed. Instead, she walked to the porch swing and sat with her sketchpad, flipping past the pages of garden plans. She didn't draw. She just looked. "I'll be back in a bit," Franklin said. They walked together to Delia Munn's pristine brick house, the one with perfect boxwood hedges and a porch sign that read, "Bless this mess," a sign that, Franklin noted grimly, contained more irony than charm. Delia opened the door wearing coral lipstick and a blouse that looked freshly pressed. "Franklin," she said with a surprised smile. "And Ellie. What a nice." "Someone destroyed our garden," Franklin cut in. "Last night. Any idea who?" Delia's lips tightened. "That garden, well, it wasn't exactly compliant with front yard standards. I warned you." "You didn't warn me someone would flatten it." "I certainly didn't authorize anything like that," she said, feigning innocence with a practiced tilt of the head. "Maybe a lawn maintenance crew got confused. These things happen." Ellie clutched the broken sign tighter. As they turned to leave, Delia called out, "You know, some residents take pride in keeping Lakewood Pines looking orderly." Franklin didn't respond. But as he and Ellie walked away, he noticed two sets of curtains twitch at neighboring houses. Back home, Franklin opened the metal cabinet in the garage. Inside was a dusty manila folder labeled Trail Easement, 1991. He stared at it for a long moment before placing it on the workbench. Meanwhile, Ellie disappeared into her room with her school backpack. A while later, she returned, holding a printed document in trembling hands. "It's my essay," she said quietly. "For the science fair application. I called it Hope, Planted and Flattened." Franklin took the pages and read silently. Her words were raw, simple descriptions of soil and seeds, but layered with the heartbreak of watching something beautiful be destroyed. He didn't say a word. Just nodded, and helped her seal the envelope. At dusk, Bill from across the trail walked up their front path. He wore a battered army jacket and carried a clay pot with a young tomato plant. "They bulldozed my bench back in 17, he said, handing over the pot. A yellow sticky note clung to the side, "Keep going." Franklin offered a tired smile. "You always know." Bill nodded once, then turned and walked back home, whistling softly. Later that night, as Franklin sat on the porch again with his second cup of coffee, Ellie pressed her forehead against the window, watching him. Neither said anything. The street was still. A manila envelope from the town zoning office appears in the mailbox, stamped urgent. Franklin blew dust off the old easement file. The map inside was yellowed, but clear. It showed a road that should never have belonged to the HOA. He unfolded the brittle paper across the attic floor, weighing the corners down with jars of buttons and an old horseshoe Ellie had once found during a nature walk. The air smelled of cedar and thyme, and the overhead bulb flickered twice before settling into a dim hum. Beneath the map's hand-inked lines was a signature in looping script, Ruth Harland, his late wife. It took him a moment to recognize her handwriting. Conditional to community use, it read beneath a note dated 1991. Her maiden name, Margot, was printed beside the parcel description. The donation was real. She had gifted the strip of land next to their property for neighbors to walk through, not for any board to rule over. He sat back on a trunk full of old coats, heart thudding in his chest like it did the day he found her recipe for peach crumble behind the spice rack. From the box beside him, he pulled a cassette tape labeled June Jazz, Porch, 1998. As the tape hissed into the player, a warm saxophone floated through the attic, followed by Ruth's soft laugh. "The tomatoes will never grow if you talk to them like that, Frankie." He let the music play. Later that afternoon, Ellie joined him, her overalls streaked with dust and marker smudges. She was sketching again, a new garden plan, complete with climbing beans and a miniature pergola made of popsicle sticks. "Did Grandma ever have a secret?" she asked, not looking up. Franklin handed her the easement file. "She didn't hide things. She just waited for the right time." They spread the documents on the kitchen table, carefully flattening pages. Ellie's eyes scanned each line with the intensity of someone far older. Franklin picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in nearly a decade. "Samir," he said when the line picked up, "I need a second set of eyes on an old map." The next morning, Samir, retired surveyor and lifelong chess rival, showed up in a blue flannel and with his own magnifying lens. "Still keeping your shoes polished on Sundays?" he teased, glancing down at Franklin's gleaming loafers. "Some habits stick." They hunched over the documents on the porch table while Ellie poured tea and brought out cookies shaped like sunflowers. "This line here," Samir pointed, "never changed. And here, this footpath. Still classified as communal access. HOA doesn't touch that." Franklin made copies. 2 sets. One went into a new folder marked with red ink and placed into the safe at the bank. The other stayed locked in his garage's file drawer beneath old tax records and warranties. That evening, under a sky full of fireflies, Franklin sat with Ellie on the porch swing. She handed him a small envelope she'd found taped inside the file, her grandmother's handwriting on the front. Inside, a folded note read, "Community is in control. Don't let them forget that." Franklin felt something steady settle in his chest. In the distance, the boardwalk sign caught the last rays of sunlight, casting a crooked shadow across their walkway. Ellie leaned into his side, humming along to the cassette that still played faintly through the kitchen window. His phone buzzed on the armrest. Samir's voice came through, clear and sure, "Frank, this land's still yours. They've got no claim." "Ellie, then why are we still asking for permission?" Franklin hammered the final bolt into place, the new gate clanging shut behind him like punctuation on a decades-old sentence. The metallic sound echoed briefly across the quiet trail, startling a squirrel that dashed up a nearby pine. He stepped back, wiped the sweat from his brow with a worn handkerchief, and glanced over his shoulder. Ellie stood a few feet away, holding a small can of white paint and a brush, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You think they'll try to take it down?" she asked, dipping the brush. "Let them try," Franklin murmured. But as the breeze rustled the branches overhead, he heard her earlier question again, "Why are we still asking for permission?" The afternoon sun glinted off the metal gate, freshly installed at the edge of the path that once welcomed families and joggers but now served as a battleground for control. This time, it wasn't installed in secret. Samir had helped him anchor the posts, leveling each beam with the precision only a retired surveyor could muster. "I double-checked the line," Samir said, tapping his clipboard. "It's yours, Franklin. Clear as daylight. They never had the right." Franklin nodded. "Then it's about time someone reminded them." Down the lane, a few neighbors lingered, pretending to prune shrubs or sweep porches, though their eyes never left the gate. One man offered a hesitant wave, a woman across the street tilted her head, arms crossed, silently calculating her position in this quiet rebellion. Ellie crouched beside the gate and began painting with careful strokes. "Hope Patch Gate," she whispered aloud as the words emerged in steady white script. She finished the last letter just as Delia's Lexus came to a slow halt near the mailbox. The door slammed with surgical efficiency. Delia marched across the street, heels tapping against pavement like a drumbeat. "Franklin," she snapped, "this is trespass. And vandalism. You've got no authority to install structures on association land." Franklin didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of his shirt. "This easement predates your bylaws by 3 decades. Donated land. My wife signed the deed herself. Community use only, not management control. Delia's mouth twitched. You think some dusty old file is going to change how we run Lakewood Pines? I think it already has. She snatched the paper but didn't unfold it. Her eyes scanned the growing number of bystanders. A teenager paused on his bike. Mrs. Kirsch from Lot 17 leaned out of her doorway, holding her Yorkie like a purse. The wind lifted the edge of the potluck flyer on the bulletin board near the lake trail, fluttering like a flag looking for an allegiance. I'm calling legal, Delia hissed, already dialing as she turned back toward her car. Her voice dropped into a private register as she climbed in. Get me the legal team. Tonight. Franklin watched her drive away, her taillights blinking red beneath the afternoon sun. He exhaled slowly, only now realizing he'd been holding his breath. Tea time? Ellie asked softly. He nodded, and they retreated to the porch, where she poured lemonade for a couple of curious passers-by and Franklin's teacup trembled slightly in his hand. Not from fear, no, not this time, but from the weight of knowing that a war he never asked for had finally arrived on his doorstep. And this time, he had the gate to prove it. The town hall smelled of folding chairs and coffee from a metal urn as neighbors filed in, some curious, some furious. Franklin adjusted his collar and took a deep breath. The community center's multipurpose room had a faded parquet floor and flickering fluorescent lights, the kind that buzzed faintly like old porch bugs in the summer. A few kids peeked through the windows before being shepherded out by their parents. The space wasn't packed, but it was filled just enough to feel like something might happen. He spotted Ellie across the room with Bill and Samir. Ellie sat cross-legged on a folding chair, sketchpad balanced on her knees, drawing what she'd titled a freedom garden, a little gate surrounded by vines, sunflowers taller than people, and a birdhouse she said would hang from the tallest tree. She looked up and smiled when Franklin nodded to her. Delia Munn stood near the podium, shoulders squared in a crisp blouse that likely hadn't wrinkled since 1993. She surveyed the room like a headmistress preparing for rebellion, lips pursed, clipboard tight in hand. The moment Franklin approached the front, she cleared her throat, voice rising above the murmurs. Let's bring this meeting to order. Franklin waited, allowing the silence to settle before he spoke. I appreciate everyone coming, he said, unfolding a worn folder and placing it on the podium. I'm here not just about my garden, but about this path, this land, what it was meant for and who it belongs to. Someone in the back whispered, "Here we go." He pulled out the deed copies first, holding up the oldest one with gentle care. This land was donated in 1991 by my late wife, Margaret Harland. It was her wish, and the legal stipulation, that the trail remain open to the community, free from management by any private authority. Delia stepped forward. That's incorrect, she snapped. This board. Please, Franklin held up a hand, let me finish. He placed a laminated map on the table. Verified by Samir Khatri, a certified retired surveyor who helped chart these lots back in the 80s. That gate I installed. It's on the edge of that boundary. You'll see here, he tapped the document, this was always public easement. Until recently. Samir stood slowly. He's right, he said plainly. The HOA claims were based on assumptions, not records. We've looked at every lot, every inch. The Harlan donation was properly filed, and it never ceded authority to any HOA. A hush rippled through the room. Chloe Reyes scribbled rapidly in a spiral notebook, glancing up from time to time. Her tape recorder clicked quietly on the seat beside her. I've lived here 12 years, someone called out. Why is this the first time I'm hearing about any of this? Delia's voice grew shrill. Because it's not how things are done anymore. You can't run neighborhoods based on what someone's wife wrote 30 years ago. Bill shifted in his chair. Maybe you can when what she wrote is still law. Someone else added, what else have they been hiding from us? Delia's fingers tightened around her clipboard, the plastic creaking in protest. Franklin reached into his pocket and withdrew a phone. He hesitated only briefly before hitting play. A soft voice filled the room, slightly crackled but unmistakably warm. If you're hearing this, Margaret's voice said, then the garden's probably blooming. I hope the trail is still open. We always wanted kids to ride their bikes there. Let them breathe. Let the land remind them they're free. A few chairs shifted. Someone sniffled. Ellie stopped drawing and watched her grandfather. Delia turned sharply and stormed toward the back, shoving the door open so hard it clattered against the wall before slamming shut. Outside, a single bird chirped into the awkward quiet. Chloe leaned over toward Franklin, her voice low but firm. This will be on the front page by Sunday. The clubhouse sign was taken down before breakfast. By noon, the locks had changed. By sundown, HOA board members were whispering in driveways. Franklin watched it all unfold from his porch, a chipped mug of black coffee in hand. He'd taken to sitting outside more often, not because the summer breeze was especially kind, but because silence now followed him wherever he went, thick, uncertain silence. People no longer nodded first. They looked, then looked away. Victory, he was learning, had a cost. Ellie knelt in the garden, her elbows smeared with dirt, a determined look on her face as she repositioned a sunflower stake. Mr. Reyes said the flowers look like they're smiling, she said, glancing back at him. He smiled faintly. Then we've done something right. From the walkway, the neighborhood appeared unchanged. Flags hung in symmetry, grass remained cut, and wind chimes danced in the July air. But the rhythm had shifted. The HOA's once proud clubhouse now sat dormant, its door sealed with yellow tape labeled "temporarily closed." Beneath that, someone had scrawled in Sharpie, "Safety my foot." A headline had done what months of neighborly complaint could not. "HOA missteps on donated land," read the article. Chloe Reyes's byline had drawn attention, but it was the photograph, Franklin, Ellie, and the gate, that spread across town faster than barbecue smoke. He tried not to read the piece more than once. But when he did, he always paused at the quote from his late wife's voicemail, because community is grown, not managed. It stirred something in him, pride, yes, but also unease. The mailbox clanked shut. Franklin rose and opened it to find a manila envelope with his name printed in all caps. Inside, neatly folded, was a cease and desist letter from the HOA attorney's office. Legal language, cold and clinical, warned him of unauthorized structural modifications and non-compliance with board-determined standards. "They're not giving up," he muttered, tucking the letter beneath a gardening catalog on the side table. Ellie looked up from her sketchpad, where she had drawn rows of vegetables, dotted with stick-figure neighbors smiling under a banner, "Freedom Garden." "Does this mean we have to take the gate down?" "No," Franklin said, then hesitated. "It means they're scared." "That's different." Delia hadn't spoken to him since the meeting, but she hadn't needed to. The way she stalked her yard, phone in hand, jaw clenched, told him plenty. Her white blouse and matching visor looked almost military under the glare of noon. Yet something had cracked. He'd seen her sitting in her car yesterday, head bowed, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. For a moment, he'd felt sorry. Later that afternoon, Ellie led a group of neighborhood kids through the regrowing patch. "Tomatoes go here, these ones are from Mr. Bill. And those sunflowers? They follow the light, like Grandpa says people should." The children listened, wide-eyed, as she passed out tiny packets of seeds folded in scrap paper. From a few yards away, Franklin saw it, movement at the gate. A figure approached slowly, Ruth Harris, one of the quieter HOA board members, always neat in pressed slacks and pastel sweaters. She looked down, then up at him, before resting a hand on the wood slat. "I used to plant roses," she said. Before all the rules made it feel like a crime." Franklin nodded but didn't speak. She held something out, a small paper envelope. "I wanted you to know, not all of us agree with her anymore. We weren't told everything. Not until you spoke up." Her voice cracked. "And even then, some of us needed more time to believe it." He accepted the envelope silently. "Be careful," she added. "Some of the board, Gary especially, they're still loyal. Or scared." She turned and walked off, leaving Franklin alone at the gate with only the rustle of trees and the occasional shout from children near the lake. That evening, as the last of the daylight flickered through the porch screen, he sorted the mail. Junk, a hardware store flyer, and another manila envelope. No return address. Just Franklin Harland in a familiar, blocky script. He opened it. Inside, a single photograph, Delia, standing beside a cluster of town officials, smiling under a banner that read Planning Committee Brunch, June 10th. In the corner, a timestamp. But Franklin remembered clearly, on that same date, she had claimed to be at a board meeting 3 towns away, reviewing neighborhood development codes. Ellie looked over from the window and asked, "Everything okay?" He nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the photo. "Getting there." Delia stood in front of the community notice board, staring at a flyer that hadn't been approved, and realizing no one had come to her for permission. The sun bore down on the green lawn where folding chairs multiplied like spring mushrooms, and beneath the shade of a striped canopy, Ellie handed out lemonade in recycled mason jars. A banner stretched from one pine tree to another, hand-painted in childlike brushstrokes, Lakewood Pines Summer Picnic. It was the first time in a decade the HOA hadn't printed official invitations. Franklin sat on a camping chair near the grill, hat tilted low but eyes sharp beneath the brim. Ruth passed him a plate of brisket, muttering, "Didn't think she'd show her face today." But Delia had. And she was watching from a distance, clutching her clipboard like a life preserver on a sinking ship. Bill wandered by, medals pinned to his worn button-up, chuckling softly as he admired Ellie's seed packets marked Hope Patch Jr. Children darted between coolers and water balloon buckets while parents mingled freely, and no one asked permission to hang streamers or set up the bounce house. The silence of collective disregard hung heavier than confrontation. Franklin's turn at the microphone came just after the 3rd round of Jell-O salad. He rose slowly, tugging at the hem of his shirt before stepping onto the makeshift stage, 2 stacked milk crates borrowed from Marge's diner. "My wife," he began, voice low but unwavering, "always said that a neighborhood is a garden, you get what you grow." Heads turned. Some nodded. Ellie gave a discreet thumbs up from behind the lemonade table. "I remember when we moved here," he continued, "Lakewood Pines had more backyard cookouts than lawn citations. It was a place for stories, not sanctions. For handshakes, not warnings." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. "My granddaughter reminded me that hope doesn't ask for permission to grow. Neither should community." A pause. Then he stepped down, letting the air carry the message further than any memo ever had. Ellie stood beside him, beaming, holding her printed science essay. "Hope, rebuilt," she read clearly, her voice as steady as the midday sun. Descriptions of crushed lavender, tomato starts, and the rebuilding of something intangible wove into her narrative like vine through a trellis. Several neighbors wiped their eyes discreetly. Chloe Reyes moved with quiet precision, snapping photos and jotting notes. On her screen, the next article was already taking shape, its title bold, "Private Ties, Public Power, HOA President Under Fire." Across the lawn, Delia approached with her usual authority. She didn't shout, but the urgency in her gait was unmistakable. "This is an unauthorized gathering," she barked, waving the clipboard like a sword. People turned. And walked away. Mid-sentence, mid-command, no argument, just quiet dismissal. Gary turned his back. Ruth busied herself with corn on the cob. Even Samir nodded slightly and moved on. Delia stood frozen, the clipboard lowering as if losing weight. Franklin waited until the moment was just awkward enough before handing her a thin folder. "Zoning infractions. From your own property. Been overlooked a long time, haven't they?" Her mouth opened, then shut. The paper trembled slightly in her grip. Ruth returned to the platform, brushing crumbs from her dress. "We're calling a special vote," she announced. "To dissolve the current HOA board. It's time." The crowd erupted, not in wild applause, but the deep, satisfied claps of people who had waited too long to be heard. Delia's face went red. She turned on her heel, eyes narrowing as she hissed, "You'll all regret this," and stormed away. Someone near the garden muttered, "Finally." The brisket was still warm. Ellie refilled pitchers. And behind the folding tables, a group of kids helped Bill stake mini flags beside the tomato beds, each labeled with a child's name. Hope had taken root. And it wasn't asking permission anymore. The gate stood open, sun shining through. Birds chirped above a garden no longer under siege. The lavender had taken root near the porch, their purple plumes nodding gently with the morning breeze. Tomato vines climbed confidently along their wire trellis, and Ellie's carrots were finally tall enough to cast skinny shadows across the mulch. Franklin poured 2 cups of coffee, one black and one with a splash of milk, and set them on the porch rail out of habit. The second cup stayed untouched, as it had for years, but the scent mingled with the wind chimes tinkling softly, small porcelain teacups, her favorites, now strung with fishing line and memory. A breeze carried the smell of cinnamon rolls from the garden table, where neighbors filtered in and out, smiling, lingering. Marge had arrived early with the new bylaws tucked under her arm, laminated and posted cleanly on the notice board, 4 bullet points, each one shorter than a sentence. Nothing about lawn color or hedge height. Just words like respect, volunteer, vote, and listen. Ellie darted across the yard, overalls stained with soil and joy. She was holding a plastic display board trimmed in green construction paper. Photos of the garden, her sketches, and pressed lavender petals surrounded a title in block letters, Hope Patch, a living science. "Grandpa," she called out, grinning, "I think Mrs. Bailey cried a little when she read my board." Franklin chuckled, reaching down to help an elderly neighbor steady her paper grocery bag. "That's what happens when truth comes with flowers," he said. Later that morning, Chloe Reyes appeared at the edge of the yard with a folded newspaper in her hand. She didn't take out a camera. Just waved, nodded, and handed the paper over. Franklin read the headline in quiet appreciation, "The Man Who Planted Back." Below it, a photo of the gate Ellie had painted, Hope Patch Gate, with sun spilling through just like it did now. Together, they walked to the fence post and pulled out the old hand-painted wooden sign. Ellie sanded down the chipped edges, and Franklin dipped the brush into white paint again. She held the board steady as he wrote slowly, carefully, not rushing a single letter. The new sign was brighter than before, but the message remained the same. By mid-afternoon, the garden had become something else, a classroom, a haven, a quiet rebellion that had somehow bloomed into belonging. Children poked at tomato vines, couples sipped lemonade in camping chairs, and somewhere in the corner of it all, Franklin polished his shoes, even though it was a Thursday. He noticed the note only as the sun dipped behind the pine trees. It was taped to the gate with painter's tape, folded once, no signature. "Thank you for reminding us who we are." He stood there for a while, not moving. The scent of warm soil and lilac drifted around him. Ellie tugged on his sleeve, eyes wide. "Can we plant pumpkins next?" Franklin laughed, the sound caught in his throat before blooming out. "We've got all the time in the world." By the time the sun warmed the garden again, what once was a quiet act of defiance had blossomed into a shared promise. Neighbors who once only nodded in passing now lingered, laughed, and looked each other in the eye. Franklin hadn't just reclaimed a piece of land, he reminded his community that rules are meant to serve people, not silence them. When power forgets its purpose, even a patch of soil can become a battleground, and a beacon. Like a weathered gate left open at last, hope has a way of growing back, stronger than before.